The Hall of Uninterrupted Assent had been designed by people who did not expect to be interrupted. It showed. The chamber was a bowl of white stone 900 tiers deep, and every tier had been cut to the same height, the same pitch, the same patient curve, because the architects had assumed that whatever sat in those seats would always be doing the same thing, listening, and then agreeing. There was no gallery for dissent. There was no aisle wide enough for a walkout. The acoustics were tuned so that a voice from the floor carried perfectly upward, and a voice from the tiers carried nowhere at all. 4,000 years of galactic government had been conducted in a room shaped like a funnel, and nobody had ever thought to ask what would happen if something got stuck in the neck of it. Wren Adeyemi was 22 years old, and on the morning it all came apart she was carrying a folding chair. The chair was not ceremonial. It was aluminum and canvas, and it had been bought in a market on the hub's 9th ring for the equivalent of 4 hours' wages, because the Terran delegation had been allotted 3 seats and had 4 bodies, and because Ambassador Halima Nkemelu had decided that a delegation which stood while it worked looked hungry, and a delegation which sat on the floor looked defeated, and a delegation which brought its own chair looked like it intended to stay. Wren had carried that chair into the Hall of Uninterrupted Assent 11 times in 3 months. She had learned exactly how to set it down so the legs did not squeak on the white stone. She had learned to sit with her spine straight and her hands still and her face doing nothing at all, because she had learned in her first week that in this room, a human face was read by 900 species as a kind of weather report, and she did not intend to broadcast. She was the third aide. That was the whole of her title. Third aide to the Terran Observer Mission, probationary member, concordance of the Great Concord. It meant she carried the chair, and the water flask, and the reader slate with the day's docket loaded onto it. And it meant that when the ambassador wanted a citation from the rolling Concord at 4 in the morning, Wren was the one awake and cross-legged on the floor of the mission's rented office with 2,000 years of appendices scrolling past her eyes. She had read more of the Concord than any other human alive. This was not a boast. It was a symptom. She had come up out of a colony that had taught her to read contracts before it taught her to read poetry, and she had never quite stopped. That morning the docket was ordinary. That was the thing that everyone afterward found hardest to explain, and the thing that Wren herself would repeat patiently for the rest of her life to committees and historians and children. The docket was ordinary. There was no ambush in it. There was no cruelty in it that any of the 900 could see. It was a Tuesday by the hub's arbitrary clock, and the Great Concord was doing what the Great Concord had done every 4 hours of every day for 4 millennia, which was to add another link to the chain and ask the galaxy politely whether anybody minded. Nobody ever minded. That was the machine. Wren had understood the machine perhaps better than the machine understood itself, because she had come to it late and from outside, and she had not been raised inside its assumptions the way a Vescharan child was raised inside them, the way a Kaveth merchant absorbed them with his first ledger. She had had to learn it deliberately, the way you learn a foreign grammar, and so she could see the shape of it. The shape of it was this. The Great Concord did not pass laws. It appended them. 22 centuries ago, drowning in its own business, the Council had made a decision that its historians still called the Great Simplification. Instead of debating and voting on each measure separately, it would maintain a single instrument, one continuous legal document, the Rolling Concord, to which all new business was added, and to which the assembled members gave their consent as a whole, once every 4 hours at the calling of the roll. Grain quotas, boundary adjustments, the licensing of jump planes, the mediation of wars, the pension of a retiring archivist. All of it went into the same chain, in the order it arrived, and the chain was consented to entire. It was, Wren had written in a private note she never showed anyone, the most efficient system of government ever devised, and it worked for exactly one reason. It had never once been tested. Because the consent was not a vote. That was the part that took her 3 weeks to believe. The roll was not a tally of ayes against nays. There was no nay. The roll was a litany. The presiding voice read out the names of the member peoples in the order of their accession, and each delegation answered with the ritual word. And when the last name had answered, the new links of the chain became the law of 40,000 worlds. The whole procedure took 11 minutes. It was beautiful. It was, in its way, the most trusting thing any collection of thinking beings had ever built. And beneath it, holding it up, was an assumption so old that it had stopped being an assumption and had become a floor, that no one would ever answer wrong. Wren set down the folding chair. It did not squeak. Ambassador Nkemelu was already in her seat, 60 years old, silver at the temples, hands folded, looking like a woman who had slept, which she had not. Beside her sat Deputy Envoy Kato Farron, who was very good at parties and less good at mornings. Wren took the third seat, the chair half a pace behind, where a third aide belonged, and unfolded the slate across her knees. The docket scrolled, Instrument 12,417, Clauses 1 through 14. Clause 1. The extension of a fishery concession in the Wren Deeps. Clause 2. The reassignment of a customs cutter. Clause 3. A memorial to a dead arbiter. Clauses 4 through 8. Tariffs, 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 a footnote about tariffs and a correction to the footnote. Clause 9. Wren read Clause 9 3 times. Then she read it a fourth time slowly, with her thumb pressed flat against the edge of the slate so that her hand would not shake, and then she leaned forward exactly as far as a third aide is permitted to lean, and said, very quietly, into the space beside the ambassador's ear, "Ma'am, Clause 9. Nkemelu did not turn her head. Say it. It's the Bellwether Registry. Say all of it." Wren said all of it. She said it in the flat, stripped, unhurried voice she used when she was most frightened, which was a habit she had picked up from her mother, who had been a shift supervisor on a colony where panic in a voice could kill people. Clause 9 transfers administrative title over the population registry of the Bellwether colony from the Terran Observer Mission to the Cavath Combine, as patron of record, pending humanity's full accession. It's framed as an administrative tidiness measure. The Combine already holds the freight and relay licenses in that system. The clause says the transfer is without prejudice to the standing of resident populations. And what does that phrase mean in the Concord? It means nothing, ma'am. It's not a term of art. It has no definition in the appendices. Wren swallowed. But population registry does. When a registry is held by a patron of record, the persons in it are resident stock. It's an old category. It comes from the Second Accession Wars. Resident stock have no standing to petition the conquered in their own voice. They petition through the patron. Which means the 341,000 people on Bellwether would stop being people the conquered can hear, and start being people the Cavath Combine speaks for. Farron, who had been listening with the sudden alertness of a man who has realized the party is over, said, "That's a nothing. That's a filing category. Nobody's harmed. Nobody's moved. Nobody's touched. It's paperwork." "Yes, sir," Wren said. "It's paperwork." She did not say the rest, because she was a third aide and because the rest was not an argument, it was a memory. She was from Bellwether. She had been born in the fourth tier of the hollow, under a sky the color of dishwater, and she had grown up in a place where the only thing standing between a person and the machinery of somebody else's convenience was a line in a register with their name on it. She had watched her father spend a year of his life proving to a shipping authority that he existed. She knew, in the specific way that only the small know, what happens to a person whose name is kept in a book that belongs to someone else. Nkemelu was silent for perhaps 4 seconds. Around them the hall murmured and settled, 900 delegations arranging their bodies and their translation fields, a sound like a slow tide over gravel. Then the ambassador said, "Get me the Combine's man." Legate Dho of the Cavath Combine crossed the floor with the easy, rolling gait of a species that had evolved on tidal flats and never entirely left them. He was broad and low and clad in the muted amber of a trading house, and he had the finest translation field money could buy, so that his voice arrived in a human ear as warm, amused, faintly paternal, the voice of a man who has already done you a favor you have not yet noticed. "Ambassador," he said, "you have a face." "I have a clause 9, Legate." "Ah?" He made a gesture that his species used for embarrassment, and that his translation field helpfully annotated as embarrassment, which was itself a kind of message. "That, yes, housekeeping. Forgive me, it should have been walked over to you and it was not, and that is my failure, and I will discipline the clerk who is responsible, who is, I regret to say me." A pause timed. "It is nothing, Ambassador. It is a filing. Every probationary member has a patron of record for its outlying registries." Every one. The Ritu had one for 300 years. The Assent had one. It is how the machine knows where to send the mail. And when we accede fully, it reverts. Naturally. Where does it say that it reverts? Dho smiled, or did the thing his people did instead. "It says it in 4,000 years of practice, Ambassador, which in this house is a great deal firmer than ink. Look, I'm not going to insult you. The Combine likes the bellwether lanes. The Combine would like them tidy, but nobody in the Combine has any interest in your colonists. They are 300,000 people on a wet rock. They mine tin. What in the name of the tides would we want with them?" He spread his hands, and the terrible thing, Wren thought, the thing she would remember, was that he was telling the truth. He did not want them. Nobody wanted them. Bellwether was not being taken. Bellwether was being *filed. "Withdraw the clause," Nkemelu said. "I cannot." He said it gently. "The instrument is closed. It closed at the 3rd hour. Nothing can be withdrawn from an instrument once it is closed. It can only be amended by a subsequent instrument in the ordinary course, which takes," he considered, 11, perhaps 14 months. "The clerks are very thorough." "Then hold the roll." "The roll cannot be held." A flicker of something then under the warmth, not malice, bafflement. He was being asked to stop the tide. "Ambassador, the roll is called. It has always been called. There is no hand on it. There is no lever. It is not a thing that a person does. It is a thing that happens." He leaned in, and his voice dropped into genuine kindness, which was worse than everything else. "Assent, and let it go. In 4 months you will be a full member, and I will personally carry the amendment, and you will have your registry back, and we will drink something dreadful together and laugh. This is how it is done. This is how it has always been done. Nobody has ever." He stopped. He stopped because he had run into the end of the sentence and discovered, with the mild surprise of a man finding a wall in a room he thought he knew, that there was nothing on the other side of it. Nobody has ever what * Legate. The bell rang. It was not a bell. It was a note, generated in the stone itself, a low sustained tone that lived in the sternum rather than the ear, and it meant that the Concord was in session and the roll would be called, and it had rung, without significant variation, every 4 hours for 4,000 years. 900 delegations rose. The sound of it was like a forest standing up. At the floor of the funnel, on a plinth of black stone worn concave by the feet of 1,100 predecessors, the presiding voice took her place. Her name was Calatric's son, and she was Vescharan, tall, narrow, her long skull plated in mineral the color of old ivory, her 4 hands folded in the posture that meant the house is at peace. She had held the voice for 19 years. She was not a ruler. She was, and she would have insisted on the word, a reader. Her office was to read the names in order and to speak the closing formula, and in 19 years she had never once had to do anything else, and she was proud of that in the specific, unshowy way that a good civil servant is proud of an unbroken record. "The Concord is gathered," she said, and the funnel carried it to 900 tiers. "The instrument is closed and lies before you. 12,417, in 14 clauses. The keeper affirms the text. From the recess beneath the plinth, an old voice, dry as shed skin. The keeper affirms. The keeper of the rolling Concord was named Orun-Teth, and Orun-Teth was Melek, which meant that Orun-Teth was, in a sense that human law had no vocabulary for, several thousand years old, a continuous memory passed down a chain of bodies, each one inheriting the last one's recollections whole. The Melek had kept the Concord since the Concord had existed. Orun-Teth had personally, in one body or another, watched every link of the chain go in. "Then the roll is called," said Galactic's son. And she began to read the names. It was the oldest sound in the galaxy. Wren had heard it 11 times, and it had not stopped raising the hair on her arms. The accession order. The founders first, then the joiners, then the absorbed, then the reconciled, then the late and the small and the strange. 900 peoples in the order they had come in, each name spoken clearly, and after each name a single word returned out of the tears, in 900 voices and 1,000 translations, all of them rendering into the same syllable. Assent. The Vescharan reach. Assent. The Osic combine of combines. Assent. The Kavath combine. Assent, said Dhosem without looking up. The 9 choirs of Melek. Assent. The Ritu in wardship. A pause. The Ritu delegate was small and slow, and always a half-beat late, and 900 delegations had learned to wait for it with the affectionate impatience of people waiting for an old relative on a staircase. Assent, said Ilvan of the Ritu. On and on, the deep fisheries, the Rin, the ascendant solitudes, the 11 peoples of the chain, names Wren could not pronounce in species she had never seen, some of them present only as a light or a pressure or a smell in the air of their tier. 11 minutes. It was a liturgy, and like all liturgies it worked by rhythm, and the rhythm was name, assent, until the rhythm was the only real thing in the room, and the words inside it had gone soft and weightless from 4,000 years of use. Wren sat very straight in her folding chair, and she found that her heart was beating so hard that she could feel it in her teeth, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, "This is a song, not a vote. A song, and everyone in this room has forgotten that they are allowed to stop singing." "Humanity," said Galactic's son, "in probation." The ambassador rose. She was 60 years old, and she was tired, and she had a granddaughter on bellwether, and she took one breath, and she said, in a clear voice pitched exactly for the funnel, one word. "No." And the hall of uninterrupted assent discovered, 4,000 years too late, that it had been built with no way to hold a silence. Nothing happened. That was the first strangeness, and afterward it was the one that the recordings could never quite convey, because a recording shows you a room full of beings not moving and it looks like a pause. It was not a pause. It was a system failing to find the next instruction. Galactic's son stood on her worn black plinth with her 4 hands folded and her mouth open, and she did not speak, because the next thing in the liturgy was the next name, and the liturgy did not have a branch. The liturgy was a straight line. It went, name, assent, name, assent. There was nothing in it that told her what to do with a asterisk, no asterisk, in the same way that there is nothing in a staircase that tells you what to do when a step is missing. Her body kept going, and there was no floor there. She said, "I beg your pardon." It came out as a person, not as an office, and the funnel carried it up through 900 tiers with perfect fidelity, and 40,000 worlds heard the presiding voice of the great Concord say, "I beg your pardon," in the voice of a woman who has been handed something in the dark and cannot identify it by touch. Ambassador Nkemelu remained standing. The Terran Observer Mission does not assent to Instrument 12,417. Sun's hands came unfolded. It was the first time in 19 years that her hands had come unfolded on the plinth, and half the hall was watching her hands instead of listening. You wish to speak to a clause? No, presiding voice. We wish not to assent to the instrument. Then you must speak to a clause. That is how a member indicates a difficulty. One speaks to a clause and the clause is noted and the instrument passes, and the note is carried to the Office of Reconciliation, and in the ordinary course. We understand the ordinary course, said Nkemelu. We are not availing ourselves of it. Our answer to the roll is no. And there it was again, and this time it went into the tiers, and Wren, sitting behind and to the left, hands flat on her knees, face doing nothing, watched a thing she had never seen and would never see again, which was 900 civilizations simultaneously trying to remember whether this was allowed. The murmur began at the top where the small and late peoples sat and rolled down. It was not outrage. That was what she noticed. Outrage would have been survivable. Outrage had a script. This was something older and more childlike. It was what is happening. It was the noise a crowd makes when the lights go out in a theater and nobody yet knows if it is part of the play. Below the plinth, in the recess of the keeper, something stirred. Presiding voice. Orun Teth did not raise the dry voice and did not need to. The recess was cut so that the keeper spoke directly into the stone, and the stone spoke to the room. The murmur went out like a snuffed wick. Presiding voice. The keeper directs the house to Article 17. Sun said, there is no Article 17. There is, said Orun Teth, an Article 17. A long, awful silence, in which the presiding voice of the great Concord stood on her plinth and searched a memory that contained every article of the founding charter, and found, in a place she had never had cause to look, a small door she had walked past 10,000 times. Should a member, Orun Teth recited, being called upon in the roll decline to give assent, the instrument shall be held in abeyance, and the member shall be heard. Silence. That, said Galactic Sun slowly, is the whole of it. That is the whole of it. There is no period specified for the abeyance. There is not. There is no procedure specified for the hearing. There is not. There is no, and here the presiding voice stopped, and Wren saw the exact instant in which a competent, decent, unimaginative official understood the size of the thing standing in her chamber. There is no mechanism by which the abeyance is lifted. There is not, said Orun Teth, save by assent. And then the noise came, and it was not a murmur. Here is what a human being needs to understand about the rolling Concord, and it is the thing that Wren Adeyemi spent the following weeks explaining over and over to journalists and ministers and frightened men in expensive coats, none of whom wanted to believe it, because it was too simple. The Concord was one chain, not one law, one asterisk chain asterisk. Every act of galactic government for 22 centuries was a link in it, and the links were consented to in sequence, and each new link inherited its force from the unbroken assent of all that had come before. When the roll was called, the members were not consenting to 14 clauses. They were reconsenting to the entire chain, all of it, back to the beginning, with 14 new links on the end. Which meant that an instrument held in abeyance did not simply pause 14 clauses. It paused the chain. Everything downstream of instrument 12,417, every act of business queued behind it, and business queued in that house at a rate of 200 items a day, was now legally inert. It could not be added because you cannot add a link to a chain that is not being held. Nothing could be enacted. Nothing could be renewed. Nothing could be paid, licensed, ratified, mediated, forgiven, or filed. The Concord had, in the space of one syllable, stopped being a government and started being a very large room full of people. By the end of the first day, there were 4,000 items in abeyance. By the end of the first week, there were 31,000. The hub, which was a city the size of a small moon, and which existed for no other purpose than to feed the Concord, discovered by degrees what it was like to be a heart in a body with a stopped artery. The clerks kept working. That was the thing. The clerks kept working, magnificently, filing and stamping and routing, because clerks are the last people in any civilization to stop doing their jobs, and the great sorting halls filled up with beautifully prepared documents that could not go anywhere. Wren walked past one of them on the fourth day and looked through the arch and saw a hall the size of a cathedral filling slowly with paper, like a bathtub, and the sound in it was the sound of 10,000 beings being very competent about nothing at all. The Terran mission's rented offices were on the 9th ring, 4 rooms above a Wren noodle stall, and by the 3rd day they had become the center of the galaxy. They came in waves, and Wren, whose job it was to answer the door, learned to read the waves. The first wave was the friendly. Delegations that had never once acknowledged that humanity existed arrived bearing small gifts and enormous confusion, and sat on the mission's borrowed furniture and asked, in 100 courteous circumlocutions, the same question. What do you want? Not asterisk why did you do that? What do you asterisk want? Because in the entire architecture of the Great Concord, there was no category for an act that was not a bid. A refusal to them could only be a lever. A lever is a thing you pull to get a thing. Therefore the humans were pulling for something, and if the something could be identified and delivered, the lever would be released and the world would resume. Nkemelu received them all and told them all the same thing, which was the truth. Withdraw the clause. And they went away baffled, because the clause could not be withdrawn. The instrument was closed. The machine did not run backward. And because the humans kept refusing to name a price, which they took to mean that the price was going to be enormous. The second wave was the frightened. A Wren fishery syndic came at the end of the first week, and stood in the middle of the mission's front room, shaking so hard that his gill frills chattered, and explained that his people's seasonal harvest licenses had been in Clause 1, and that his fleet was tied up at dock, and that his crews were being paid out of a fund that would run dry in 19 days. An OSIC factor came and explained about a bond issue. A hospital administrator from a world Wren had never heard of came and sat, and would not speak for 11 minutes, and then explained about a shipment. Wren wrote them all down. She wrote every one of them down in a hand-bound book she had bought on the 9th ring, because the mission systems were certainly compromised, and because she had decided on the 2nd day that if humanity was going to do this thing, then humanity was going to know precisely what it cost and was not going to be permitted to forget. She was 22. She wrote very small and very neatly. By the end of the 2nd week, the book had 400 entries in it, and she had stopped sleeping properly. And she never once considered that the book was a strange thing for a 3rd aide to be keeping. The 3rd wave was the Caveth Combine, and the Caveth Combine did not send a wave. It sent Dho Sem, alone in the middle of the night, with a bottle of something dreadful. You are killing us, he said, pleasantly pouring. You understand that, not with a fleet, with a asterisk word asterisk. Do you know what my house has in freight right now, sitting still? Do you know what the insurance underwriters on the 11th ring did this morning? Withdraw the clause, said Nkemelu. I have offered you the asterisk moon asterisk, ambassador. I have offered you full accession in 60 days instead of 4 months. I have offered you a seat on the Presidium, a probationary member on the asterisk Presidium. Do you know what that costs me in favors? I have offered to buy Bellwether's tin at 4 times the market price for a century. I have offered you everything you could want, and you sit there and say withdraw the clause asterisk. And I cannot, ambassador, I cannot asterisk. The machine does not go backward, and you know it. And so what I begin to think, and he set down the glass, and for the first time the warmth went out of him entirely, and what was underneath was not cruelty but a terrible, cornered honesty. What I begin to think is that you do not want anything at all, that there is no price, that you simply will not asterisk, and that this is a thing your species can asterisk do. He looked at her. And if that is true, he said, then we are all of us standing on a floor that was never there. He left the bottle. Earth, meanwhile, was losing its mind. It took 11 days for the news to metabolize through the human polity, and when it did, the reaction was not pride. Wren had expected pride. What came instead, through the relay, was the sound of a civilization discovering that its bluff had been called by its own ambassador. 341,000 people on Bellwether, 14 billion on Earth and her worlds, 90% of whose economy now ran on lanes, licenses, relays, and credit lines that the Great Concord had just stopped being able to renew. The Combine did not have to blockade anything. The Combine simply had to wait and let humanity's own carriers sit at their own docks with unrenewable clearances, and let the underwriters draw their own conclusions. The Terran Assembly convened for 90 hours. Wren watched the feeds in the mission's back room with her knees pulled up to her chest, and listened to serious people say serious things about proportionality, and about how 300,000 colonists on a tin rock could not be permitted to become the fulcrum on which the entire human future was levered, and about how the ambassador had exceeded her instructions, which was true, and which was, Wren thought, the single most frightening sentence in any language, because of what always comes after it. On the 12th day, the recall order arrived. It was addressed, in accordance with the protocols, to Ambassador Halima Nkemelu, head of mission. It instructed her to appear at the next calling of the roll and to answer **Assent**, and to append a statement of regret in which the human refusal was characterized as a procedural misunderstanding arising from humanity's unfamiliarity with the customs of the house. It instructed her to accept the legate's offer of accelerated accession. It informed her that she was relieved of her post effective upon the Assent, and that a successor was already aboard a fast courier 11 days out. Nkemelu read it standing up, at the window, with the hub's false dawn coming up orange over the 9th ring. She said, "Well," and then she put her hand out to the sill and missed it. Wren caught her. Wren was 22, and she had never in her life caught a falling person, and she got her shoulder under the ambassador's arm and went down with her, slowly, controlled, onto the floor of a rented office above a noodle stall. And the ambassador's face on the left side had gone strange and slack, and her hand was moving in a way that was not a signal, and her eyes were the eyes of someone locked in a room with the door shut. "Kato," Wren heard herself shouting, "Kato." The hub had good medicine. The hub had 4,000-year-old medicine, and the Wren who ran the 9th ring clinic were kind and fast and unimpressed by human anatomy, and they said that the ambassador would live, and that she would speak again in time, and that time meant months, and that she would not be speaking anything at the calling of the roll in 6 hours. Deputy Envoy Kato Farron stood in the corridor of the clinic with his hands over his face for a long moment. Then he took them away, and he was pale and composed, and Wren realized that she had underestimated him, and also that he was about to say something she was not going to like. "I'm taking the seat," he said. "The recall order stands. It's addressed to the head of mission, and I'm the head of mission now. God help me. And I'm going to walk into that room in 6 hours, and I'm going to say the word and end this." "Sir." "Wren," he said it kindly. "She had a stroke over it. Look at what it did to her. It's going to do that to all of us and to 14 billion more, and for what? For a filing category, for a asterisk word in a asterisk book asterisk." His voice cracked very slightly, and he mastered it. "I'm not a coward. I'm just not willing to be the man who broke the human race over a footnote." And he went, and he was good, and he was brave, and he was head of mission, and he had every right. 6 hours later, the bell rang, and Kato Farron did not enter the hall of uninterrupted Assent. He was stopped at the arch by 2 Vespasian ushers and a functionary of the Office of Precedent, holding a slate, apologizing extravagantly and explaining a rule. Wren, coming up behind him with the folding chair under her arm, heard the whole thing. The rule was called the occupied chair, and it was older than the rolling Concord, and it existed because of a scandal 1100 years dead in which a great house had swapped its delegate mid-crisis to escape a commitment. It provided that where a member was in abeyance, that is, where a member had declined assent and the matter stood open, the seat of that member was held, not by the mission, not by the government, by the body that had been in the chamber at the moment of the declining, any of them. Whichever of them presented themselves at the roll, and no instruction, credential, recall, or appointment from outside the house could remove that body from the seat until the abeyance was resolved, because the abeyance was a matter before the house asterisk, and a member could not be permitted to walk its answer back by the simple expedient of changing its mouth. Cato Farron had been in the chamber, so had Wren. But Cato Farron, at the moment the ambassador had said the word, had been standing. He had risen with her, out of loyalty, and stood. And standing bodies were not seated asterisk bodies, and the rule said chair. The functionary was terribly sorry. The functionary had spent 2 days establishing this, and had personally hoped for a different answer. The seat of humanity in the great Concord, the seat that 4,000 years of unbroken procedure now made it impossible to fill with anyone else, belonged, for the duration of the abeyance, to the body that had been sitting in the 3rd chair. It belonged to a folding chair from a market on the 9th ring. It belonged to Wren Adeyemi. The bell rang again, the 2nd note, and 900 delegations rose in a sound like a forest standing up, and a 22-year-old 3rd aide stood in the archway of the hall of Uninterrupted Assent, holding a bundle of aluminum and canvas under one arm, with a recall order in her pocket that was addressed to a woman who could no longer speak, and understood that in 11 minutes the presiding voice was going to read her name. She walked in and set down the chair. It did not squeak. She had spent 3 months learning how to do that, and she thought, absurdly, as she lowered it onto the white stone at the floor of the funnel with 900 civilizations watching her, at least there is one thing here I know how to do correctly. Then she sat down and folded her hands and waited 11 minutes for her name. The recall order was in her left breast pocket. She could feel the edge of it against her ribs when she breathed. It was a lawful instruction from her lawful government, issued by people who had been elected by 14 billion of her own species, and it said assent, and Wren Adeyemi had never in her life disobeyed anything larger than a curfew. She had read the occupied chair rule twice in the archway and once more sitting down, and she understood exactly what it meant, and she understood exactly what it did not mean. It did not mean she was permitted to refuse. It meant she was permitted to answer asterisk. The rule did not put a word in her mouth. It only made certain that whatever word came out of it would be the word of humanity, and that no one, not the assembly, not the combine, not the Concord, could reach into the chamber and take it back. The rule handed her a choice, and then removed every possible excuse. That, she would understand later, was the entire architecture of the thing. That was what the founders had built, if they had built it at all, not a right of refusal. A place where refusing was asterisk possible, and where nothing else could be blamed. The Vestjaran reach. Assent. Down the long litany, and she felt each name go by like a stair descending, and she watched the tears watching her, and she thought about her father in the hollow spending a year of his life proving to a shipping authority that he existed, standing at a counter with his hat in his hands, saying my name is asterisk, and being told that his name was not in the book. The retu in wardship. The pause, then slow, assent. Humanity, said Calatric's son, in probation. Wren stood up, her legs held. She was distantly surprised by this. No, she said. Her voice was not loud. She did not make it loud. The funnel did that work, and it did it perfectly, and the syllable went up through 900 tiers and out through the relays to 40,000 worlds, in the flat, stripped, unhurried voice of a woman who had learned from her mother that panic in a voice can kill people. She sat down. That was the 9th refusal. There would be 61 in all. The roll was called every 4 hours. That was the thing that nobody outside the hub ever really grasped, and it was the reason that what followed was not a standoff but a slow, grinding, arithmetical siege. The abeyance did not persist by itself. It had to be renewed asterisk. Every 4 hours the bell rang and the funnel filled and the names were read, and every 4 hours the machine put the question again, patiently, blindly, the way a tide puts the same question to a seawall, and every 4 hours a 22-year-old woman had to stand up in front of the assembled galaxy and say it again. 6 times a day. Sleep became a discipline. She took it in 90-minute blocks between rolls, on a cot in the mission's back room, with a timer and Kato Farron, who might have hated her, who had every human reason to hate her, and who instead did the harder thing, sat outside the door and turned people away. He said once on the 4th day of it, "You know I still think you're wrong." "Yes, sir. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm going to write it all down, and it's going to be very unkind to you, and it's going to be in the record forever." "Yes, sir, you should." He looked at her for a while. "But I'll be damned," he said, "if I'll let anybody get between you and that chair. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it clean. It has to be asterisk hers, it has to be asterisk yours, or it's nothing. If they can lean on you, then the word never meant anything anyway." That was the last argument they ever had about it. The pressure came in the shape you would expect, and then it came in shapes nobody expected, and the second kind was much harder. The expected shape arrived on the 18th day, wearing the gray of the ordnance. Marshal Vess commanded the entire armed force of the Great Concord, and Marshal Vess came to the Terran mission in person, which was itself a message, and sat in the front room above the noodle stall with her helmet on her knee and looked at Wren Adeyemi for a long moment. "You are very young," she said. "Yes, Marshal. I want to be certain that you understand what I am. The ordnance is the enforcement arm of the Concord. We keep the lanes. We separate combatants. When the Concord speaks and a member does not listen, we are what listens for them." A pause. "Do you understand that?" "I understand what the ordnance is, Marshal." "Then understand this also." Vess leaned forward. "I have 206 ships." Wren said nothing. 206, Vess repeated, "for 900 peoples and 40,000 worlds and 1,100 lanes. Do you know why?" She turned the helmet over in her hands. "Because we have never needed more. Because in 4,000 years the ordnance has never once been ordered to compel a member. Not once, child. We police pirates and we escort grain and we stand between 2 idiots who want to fight over a moon, and we have never compelled. Because nobody has ever refused asterisk, and so nobody has ever had to ask what would happen if a member simply said no and sat down." She put the helmet on the table. "So I have come here to say a thing to you that I would be executed for saying on any other day of the last 4 millennia, and I am saying it because I am 60 years in this service and I am not going to lie to a child. If the Concord ordered me to Saul tomorrow, I could not do it. Not because I would refuse, I would go, I took an oath, because there is not enough of me. Your people have 1,100 hulls. The Combine has 3,000. The Reach has more than the 2 of you together, but the Reach will never lend them to a compulsion, because the day the Reach lends ships to compel a member is the day the Reach admits that a member can be compelled, and the Reach has spent 900 years insisting that it cannot." Her mouth did something complicated. "This house has no sword. It has never needed one. It has a song asterisk and everybody sings, and now you have stopped singing, and there is nothing behind the song but air." Wren sat very still. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know," said Marshal Vess, "that you cannot be made to do it. Nobody can make you. I want you to know that so that when you finally give in, and you will give in, child, because you are 22 and this is going to grind you into powder, you will know that you did it because you chose to, and you will have to carry that yourself. I do not want you to have the comfort of pretending you were forced." She stood. She retrieved her helmet. At the door she paused and did not turn. That is what I would want if it were me. I have found that being told the truth is a cruelty that eventually turns into a kindness. Good day. The unexpected shapes came after that. The formulas came first. They arrived one after another, from delegations, from the Office of Precedent, from the Presidium, and each one was more ingenious than the last, and each one was the same thing. Assent under protest. The instrument would pass. Humanity's objection would be recorded in the margin. The chain would run again. Assent with reservation as to Clause 9. The instrument would pass. The clause would be marked contested. The transfer would be executed anyway, but with a footnote. Not at this time. This one was Dho Sims, and he brought it himself, and he was almost tender about it. Say not at this time, and I will find you this time in 100 years. Say anything. Say a word that is asterisk-shaped like consent. Nobody will make you mean it. The absent member. This was the cleverest, and it came from a very old Ossic jurist who had spent 19 days in the archives and emerged glowing with the joy of a scholar who has found a loophole. If humanity simply did not attend, if the chair were empty when the name was read, then the name would be passed over, as names of absent members had always been passed over, and the roll would complete, and the chain would run. Wren read that one 4 times. It would work. That was the horror of it. It would work perfectly. She would not have to say assent. She would not have to lie or bend or sign anything or take Dho Sims' money or stand up in front of the galaxy and pretend that the word she had said was not the word she had meant. She would simply have to not be in the room. She would have to oversleep once. She would have to be ill once. She would have to be, for 11 minutes, somewhere else. She sat with that one for a long time in the back room of the mission, with the timer running. And then she wrote her answer, and she wrote it herself, without help, in the flat, unadorned Concord standard that she had taught herself out of appendices, and she sent it to the Office of Precedent, and to the Presidium, and to Legate Dho Sim, and because she had learned something about how this house worked, to the keeper of the rolling Concord. It said, "The Terran Observer Mission thanks the House for its ingenuity, and declines each of the proposed formulas, for the following reason. Each of them is a method by which the House may be told that humanity has refused, while the record shows that humanity has consented. The House wishes this because the House believes the difficulty is a difficulty of business, that 31,000 items are frozen, and that a formula will thaw them. But the difficulty is not a difficulty of business. If the record can be made to show consent where consent was not given, then the record has never shown consent at all. It has only ever shown that the members were in the room. And if that is so, then every act of this House for 4,000 years rests not on the agreement of 900 peoples, but on their attendance. Humanity does not believe that. Humanity believes this House is better than that. Humanity intends to prove it by declining to be laundered. The mission will attend every roll. The mission will answer every roll. The answer will be no, and it will be no in the open, where it can be seen, and it will remain no until the clause that occasioned it is not law." Oranteth read that message in the recess beneath the plinth, and the keeper of the rolling Concord, who had watched every link of the chain go in, who had been keeper when the great simplification was voted, and had warned against it in a body 11 generations dead, sat for a long while in the dark. And then, for the first time in 240 years, the keeper of the rolling Concord left the recess and went out into the city. The cruelty arrived on the 26th day, and it did not come from an enemy. It came from a hospital administrator named Teo Hanrell of the World Terrace, who had sat in the mission's front room for 11 silent minutes in the first week and then explained about a shipment, and who now came back and did not sit. Terrace had a blight, not a plague, a blight, a fungal thing in the lungs that took the very young and the very old and left everyone else coughing, and Terrace had been fighting it for 2 years and had very nearly won, and the winning depended on a dispensation. A Concord dispensation, permitting a Melic pharmaceutical house to manufacture a compound outside the terms of its license, in bulk, for free, because a Melic pharmaceutical house had decided to be decent about it. The dispensation had been drafted, it had been read, it had been queued. It was item 9004 in the abeyance. 400 children, said Teo Hanrell, standing in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides. In the last 3 weeks. That is not an estimate, that is the count. I am not here to accuse you. I have read your letter. I think you may even be right, and I do not have the strength to think about whether you are right. I am here because I am the man who signs the notifications, and I have signed 400 of them, and I wanted the person who is doing this to see the face of the man who signs them. Nobody in the room said anything. That is all, he said. Thank you for receiving me. And he left. Cato Farron was white. He said, Wren. I know. Wren, we have to. I asterisk no asterisk. She was standing at the window with her hands flat on the sill and she was shaking, and she made herself stop because she had learned that from her mother too. She said, get me the docket, all of it, every item in abeyance sorted by what happens if it stays there. And get me Ilvan of the Ritu, and get me a channel to the keeper, and Cato, listen to me, get me the founding charter, not the Concord, the charter, the first document. The one nobody reads. What are you going to do? Wren Adeyemi turned around, and she was 22 years old, and she had not slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch in 18 days, and there was something in her face that Cato Farron later described. In the very unkind memoir he did in fact write, as asterisk the most frightening thing I have ever seen on a human being, which was a person deciding to be reasonable. They think this is a hostage situation, she said. They think I'm holding 31,000 items and 400 children in a room, and that eventually I'll get tired. That's what they think, because in 4,000 years nobody has ever refused, and so they have no idea what a refusal even is asterisk. They think it's a lever. She picked up the hand-bound book with 400 entries in it. So we're going to show them what it actually is, she said. It's a asterisk door asterisk, and doors go both ways. The medicine goes to Terrace, Cato. It goes this week. And it doesn't go because I gave in, it goes because this house is finally going to have to learn how to asterisk do something. The founding charter of the Great Concord was 11 pages long. Nobody read it. That was not laziness. It was architecture. The charter had been superseded in every practical respect by 22 centuries of rolling Concord, the way a foundation is superseded by a house, and no one climbs down into the crawlspace to admire the footings. The Office of Precedent kept a copy under glass. The Presidium quoted its preamble at graduations. The actual text in the actual original had been consulted 11 times in 400 years, and 9 of those had been by the keeper. Wren read it in one sitting, at 3 in the morning between rolls, with a cup of something bitter going cold at her elbow. It was not what she expected. She had expected grandeur. What she found was a document written by people who were frightened in a specific, technical, engineering way, the way you can hear in the terse voice of someone who has already watched one bridge fall down. There was no soaring language. There were procedures. There were 11 pages of dry, careful, obsessive procedures written by beings emerging from 3 centuries of the accession wars, and the whole of it was organized around a single terrified question, which was, how do 900 peoples make a decision together without one of them holding a knife? And the answer the founders had given was, they don't compel, ever, for any reason, not once, because the first time we compel, we are an empire and we have all seen what that costs. Article 17 was on page 9. It sat in a cluster of provisions about the conduct of the roll, and it was as small and as unremarkable as Orrin Teth had said. Should a member, being called upon in the roll, decline to give assent, the instrument shall be held in abeyance, and the member shall be heard. But it was Article 18 that made Wren Adeyemi put down her cup very slowly and sit back in her chair. Where an instrument stands in abeyance, and where the House judges that a several matter within it is of such urgency that it cannot abide the hearing, the House may sever that matter and put it separately, and the roll shall be called upon it alone. She read it 11 times. Then she laughed, one short cracked sound in an empty room at 3 in the morning, because it was so obvious, and because it had been sitting there for 4,000 years, and because the reason nobody had ever used it was the most human reason in the universe. There had never been an abeyance, so there had never been a severance, so there was no asterisk form for a severance. No template, no clerkly procedure, no established practice, no precedent, nothing in the great sorting halls that told a clerk what a severed instrument looked like or where to file it. The power existed. The paperwork did not. And in a bureaucracy 4,000 years old, a power with no paperwork is not a power at all. It is a rumor. The great Concord had spent 22 centuries building the most elegant machine in the galaxy on top of a foundation with a whole spare room in it, and had forgotten the room was there, because the door had no handle and nobody had ever needed to open it. Wren Adeyemi spent the next 19 hours building a handle. She did not do it alone. That mattered. She made certain of it afterward, in every account she ever gave, because the temptation to tell it as one girl in a chair was enormous, and it was a lie. Ilvin of the Ritu came, in wardship, always a half-beat late, and turned out to have been a clerk of the office of precedent for 140 years, before being appointed to a seat his people had not asked for, and to know more about the filing conventions of the great sorting halls than anyone alive. He read Article 18 and made a small sound like a kettle, and did not speak for 2 full minutes. "My people," he said at last, "have been in wardship for 311 years. Our registry is held by a patron of record." "I know," Wren said. "We assented to that at the time. There was a roll and our name was read, and we said the word because—" He moved his small hands helplessly, "because it was the word one says. I know. I have been in this house for 140 years, child, and it has never once occurred to me that I was allowed to say anything else." He looked at Article 18 for a long moment. "Where would you like me to begin?" Orenteth came too. The keeper of the rolling Concord came up the stairs above a Rin noodle stall at 4 in the morning, moving very slowly, and sat down in a chair that had been built for a species with a different spine, and said, in the dry voice that had annotated 4,000 years, "You wish to know why the founders wrote Article 18, and then built a machine in which it could never be used." "I wish to know," said Wren, "how to file it." The keeper made a sound. It might have been amusement. It was, on reflection, probably delight. "That," said Orenteth, "is the correct question. Sit down, child, and take a pen." The severance was laid before the House on the 31st day. It was 6 pages long. It severed from instrument 12,417 nothing at all, for the clause that had caused the abeyance was not urgent, and Wren had been very careful not to touch it, and it severed instead, from the vast dead weight of the docket behind it, 109 matters, each of which had been identified in a hand-bound book with 400 entries as a thing that would kill someone if it waited. Item 1 was the terrace dispensation. Item 2 was a Wren fishery license, because the crews had 19 days of pay, and the 19 days were up. There were hospital shipments and a grain convoy, and a lane clearance for an evacuation, and a mediation between 2 peoples who had begun, in the vacuum, to shoot at each other. There was a bond issue that would have taken an entire small economy down with it. There was, at number 109, at the insistence of Ilvin of the Ritu, who had a sense of humor after 140 years in precedent, the pension of a retiring archivist. and attached to it in the manner that made the whole thing possible, and that made the clerks of the great sorting halls weep with recognition when they saw it, was a form 14 pages of form, filing conventions, routing codes, a stamp design, a specimen entry for the index. The complete clerkly apparatus of a procedure that had existed on paper for 4,000 years and had never once been performed, invented in 19 hours by a Ritu ex-clerk, a Melic memory, and a 22-year-old human who had grown up in a place where you learned to read contracts before you learned to read poetry. Calatric's son stood on her worn black plinth and read it, and then read it again, and then looked up into the funnel at 900 tiers of civilization, and Wren watched the presiding voice of the great Concord understand that she was about to have to do something that no presiding voice had ever done, which was make a ruling asterisk. "The House," said Calatric's son slowly, "will sever." And the roll was called on the severance alone, and it took 11 minutes, and 900 delegations said assent, and the Terran Observer Mission in probation said assent, and the medicine went to Terrace that night on a Melic fast courier, and it arrived 11 days sooner than it would have if humanity had never said a word at all. Because the old machine would have carried it in the ordinary course, in the chain, behind 4,000 other items at the speed of the tide. Teo Hanrel sent no message. But on the 34th day, a crate arrived at the Terran mission containing 9 kilos of a bitter dried fruit that grew only on Terrace, and no note, and Wren ate one and cried for 4 minutes with her fist in her mouth, and then washed her face and went to the roll and said no asterisk. That was the 38th refusal. And that was the moment the crisis stopped being about humanity. It happened by degrees, the way an ice sheet goes, not with a crack but with a change in the sound. The severance had proved something that no letter, no speech, and no threat could have proved, which was that the House was not helpless, that the frozen docket had never been humanity's hostage, that 31,000 items had been sitting in the sorting halls, not because one girl was holding them, but because 900 peoples had preferred, for 4,000 years, not to look in the crawlspace. The Concord had been told that it was paralyzed by a human refusal, and it had discovered, in 19 hours of clerical work, that it had been paralyzed by itself. And once the members had noticed that, once they had felt, for the first time, the peculiar sensation of the House doing something new, a much more dangerous thought followed at home. The roll is not a vote, the roll is a song, and nobody has ever tried to stop singing. Ilvan of the Ritu was the first, and it broke Wren's heart because he did not do it well. He rose at the 44th roll when his name was called, and stood a half-beat late as always and did not say assent, and did not say no asterisk, and instead said, in a voice that shook, "The Ritu, in wardship, ask leave to be heard before answering." There was no procedure for that either. Calatric's son stared at him, and then, and this was the thing, this was the whole thing, she said, "The House will hear the Ritu." 12 delegations asked to be heard at the next roll, 19 at the next. None of them refused. Not one, not yet. They were not brave. They were 3 centuries deep in habit, and they had families and economies and patrons of record. But they had begun, all across the tiers of that white stone funnel, to do the thing that no member of the great Concord had done in 4,000 years, which was to hesitate and to notice that the hesitation cost them nothing, and to feel the floor under their feet and find that it was real. The Presidium met in emergency session on the 49th day, and the Caveth Combine put a motion. Dhosem came to tell Wren himself. He came at midnight alone, and he did not bring a bottle. "It is called the Adjuration," he said. "Nobody has heard of it. It is in the Charter on page 10. You have read page 10, I imagine, since you appear to have read everything." "I've read page 10. "Then you know." He sat heavily. Where a member's conduct threatens the existence of the conquered, the House may adjure, may compel, by the unanimous acclamation of every other member. 900 voices, not 899, all of them. And then the ordinance may be sent, and the member may be made to answer, and the reach will lend its hulls, because an adjuration is not a compulsion of one member by another. It is the conquered asterisk speaking as one thing asterisk, which is the only circumstance in which the reach has ever been willing to fight. He looked at his hands. It has never been used. It has never been asterisk proposed asterisk. And I proposed it, Wren Adeyemi, 4 hours ago in the Presidium, and I want you to hear from my own mouth that I did it, because you have been honest with me from the first day, and I find that I have developed a taste for it, and now I cannot get it out of my mouth. Wren said, "Will it pass?" "I do not know," and he laughed, a strange wet sound. "Do you understand how remarkable that sentence is? In this house, nothing has ever been asterisk put asterisk that did not pass. There has never been a thing that anyone did not know the answer to. And now I sit here at midnight and I do not know, and I have not slept, and neither has anyone else on the 11th ring. And do you know what I think, child? I think you have not broken our government. I think you have asterisk started asterisk it. And I am 51 years old, and I do not know if I can bear it." He stood. "The adjuration is put at the 61st roll, 3 days. It requires the acclamation of every member but you." He paused at the door, as Marshal Vess had paused at that same door, and like her, he did not turn. "If it carries, they will come for Bellwether first, not with fire, with clerks. They will simply write the 341,000 into the Combine's book, and the ordinance will stand off the world while they do it, and nobody will be hurt, and it will be perfectly legal, and it will be the end of everything the founders were afraid of. And if it fails—" Dhosem was quiet for a long moment. "If it fails," he said, "then it will be known forever in every tier of that room that this house cannot compel a member, and every one of the 900 will go home and look at their own patron of record, and their own tariff, and their own wardship, and their own 311 years, and they will asterisk think asterisk." His voice was almost a whisper. "That is not a crisis, Wren Adeyemi. That is a asterisk reformation. And I do not know whether I am trying to prevent it, or whether I have spent my whole life waiting for it, and that is why I have not slept." On the night before the 61st roll, a message came from Earth. The Terran Assembly had fallen. Not violently. It had simply come apart, 90 hours of argument collapsing into a vote of no confidence. And out of the wreckage, a caretaker government had assembled itself at 4 in the morning, and had done the only thing that a caretaker government of a species with 1,100 hulls and no allies could do, which was to send its youngest, most exposed, least protected citizen a message and let her decide. Wren read it alone in the back room with the timer running. It was 4 sentences long. "The Assembly cannot instruct you. The Assembly has discovered that it does not have the standing to instruct you, because the Assembly did not have to say it, and you do, 6 times a day and have 60 times. Whatever you answer at the 61st roll will be the answer of the human race, and will be defended by the human race with everything it has, which is not very much. Go and say what is true." She sat with it for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in her left breast pocket where the recall order had been, and lay down on the cot, and set the timer, and slept for 90 minutes without dreaming, and got up, and washed her face, and picked up a folding chair from a market on the 9th ring, and went to work. The hall of Uninterrupted Assent had never been full. That sounded impossible, and it was not. 900 delegations held seats, but a seat is not a body, and for 4,000 years the hall had run at perhaps 2/3 strength on an ordinary day, because the roll did not need you and everyone knew it. Junior aides answered for absent lords. Whole tiers stood empty at the 3rd hour. It was a chamber built for 900 that had been attended in practice, by however many happened to be awake. On the 61st roll, every seat was occupied. Wren came in with the chair under her arm and stopped in the archway, because the light was wrong. It took her a moment to understand why. The tiers had filled all the way to the top, up into the high, thin galleries where the small and late people sat, and the pale stone that had been visible between the bodies for 4 millennia was gone, and the funnel was a solid wall of attention, and the room had never once looked like this, and it had been designed 4,000 years ago by people who imagined it exactly this way. She walked down to the floor and set down her chair. It did not squeak. Galactic's son took the plinth, and she looked as though she had not slept in 90 days, which was approximately correct, and she read the motion. The Presidium puts the adjuration. It is moved that the conduct of the member Humanity in probation threatens the existence of the Concord, and that the member be compelled, by the unanimous acclamation of all other members, to give assent to Instrument 12,417. She lowered the slate. Before the roll is called, the House will hear the member. That was Article 17, and the member shall be heard. 61 rolls in 38 days, and nobody had ever gotten around to it, because there was no procedure for a hearing, and everyone had assumed the abeyance would collapse before anybody had to invent one. Wren stood up. She had not written a speech. She had tried twice, and both times what came out was the kind of thing that a young person writes when they know they are being watched by a galaxy, and she had burned both of them in the mission's sink and understood, somewhere around the 55th roll, that the only speech worth giving was the one she would have given to her father in the hollow, at the counter, with his hat in his hands. Humanity is asked, she said, to explain why it will not consent to a filing category. The House believes the answer must be large because the consequences have been large. 31,000 items, a blight on terrace, a fishing fleet at dock, an assembly fallen on Earth. The House has been searching for 38 days for a reason big enough to have caused all of that, and it cannot find one, and so it has concluded that humanity must be hiding it. Humanity is not hiding anything. The reason is exactly the size it appears to be. Clause 9 would move 341,000 names out of a book that belongs to them and into a book that belongs to somebody else. Nobody would be moved. Nobody would be hurt. Nobody in the Caveth Combine wants those people. The legate has said so, and he was telling the truth. It is housekeeping. And humanity's answer is no. And the answer is no for a reason that this House is going to find insulting in its smallness. Because it was not agreed to. That is all. That is the whole of it. 341,000 people did not agree, and they were not asked, and no one in this chamber can name the moment at which their names stopped being theirs. And humanity has looked very carefully for a reason to say yes anyway, and every reason it found was a reason of convenience . And humanity has been in this House for 3 months and has already learned that in the Great Concord, convenience is the only argument that has ever won. The House has offered many formulas: assent under protest, assent with reservation, not at this time, absence from the chamber. Every one of them was a way to make the record say a thing that is not so. And the House pressed them on humanity urgently, desperately, as though everything depended on it, and the House was right, because everything does . Here is what humanity has come to understand, and it offers it with respect, because it took 38 days and a great deal of help to see it, and because it is not an accusation. This House has no army. Marshal Vess has 206 ships for 40,000 worlds, and she will tell anyone who asks. This House has no power to compel. The founders removed it deliberately on page 10 and hid the only key to it behind a lock that requires 900 hands. This House does not rule. It has never ruled. What this House has is a habit . Every 4 hours the names are read and the word comes back, and it comes back because it came back the last time, and the time before, and for 4,000 years, and the whole magnificent weight of galactic civilization. The lanes, the treaties, the peace, the grain, the medicine, the ending of the accession wars. The whole of it stands on 900 peoples continuing to answer out of habit. And that is not a weakness. Humanity wishes to say this very clearly, because it has been said wrongly on 40,000 worlds for 38 days. It is not a weakness. It is the single most extraordinary thing that thinking beings have ever built. 900 species have kept the peace for 4 millennia, and they have done it without a sword, and the only thing holding it together is that everyone keeps choosing to hold it together, over and over, 6 times a day, forever. But a choice that is never refused stops being a choice. It becomes a reflex asterisk, and a civilization that runs on reflex will eventually, not from malice, never from malice, always from housekeeping, file 341,000 people into somebody else's book, because it will have forgotten that any of it was ever chosen at all. So the answer is no. Not to break this house, to wake it. Because if a single no can bring the Great Concord to a halt, then the Great Concord was never resting on its power. It was resting on its members' consent, all along, exactly as the founders intended, and the members had simply stopped noticing that they were the ones holding it up. That is not a crisis. That is the discovery that the floor is real. Humanity has been asked what it wants. It wants Clause 9 struck. It wants the abeyance ended by agreement and not by compulsion and not by a form of words. And it wants one more thing, which it has drafted and which the keeper holds, and which it will put before the house when the roll is done. That is all. Humanity thanks the house for hearing it. Humanity is aware that it is very young, and that it has cost this chamber a great deal, and it is sorry for the fishing fleet, and it will carry Terrace for the rest of its life. But the answer is no. She sat down. The silence in the hall of uninterrupted assent went on for 11 seconds. It is on the recording. Historians have measured it. The roll, said Galactic's son, is called upon the adjuration. And she began to read the names, and the names were being asked, for the first time in 4,000 years, not to consent to housekeeping, but to consent to force asterisk. The Vestcharan reach. A pause. The Vestcharan delegate, an old lord, plated like the presiding voice, who had held his seat for 60 years and had never in that time said a word other than the word, rose slowly. The reach, he said, asks leave to be heard before answering. It went through the chamber like a change in air pressure. The reach is heard, said Galactic's son. The reach, said the old lord, has spent 900 years insisting that no member of this Concord can be compelled. It has been the pride of my house. It has been the argument by which we ended the accession wars. He stood there, very straight, in a room where 900 civilizations were watching him. The reach cannot vote to compel today and continue to say that tomorrow. The reach abstains. An abstention is not a refusal. An abstention is a nothing, a shrug, a hand withheld. But the adjuration required unanimous acclamation, not a majority, not a great preponderance, every voice but one. The old lord had not defeated the motion. He had done something much worse. He had shown that it could be defeated by a shrug. That 4,000 years of unbroken assent could be ended not by courage, but by the simple, ordinary, entirely safe act of declining to lift one's hand. The Ossic combine of combines. The Ossic abstain. The Kavath combine. Dhosem stood up. He looked, Wren thought, like a man at the end of a very long walk. He had put the motion. It was his. His house had drafted it and whipped it and spent 11 days and an immense fortune in favors assembling the unanimity it required, and he had told a 22-year-old girl about it at midnight because he had developed a taste for honesty and could not get it out of his mouth. The Kavath combine, he said, Withdraws Clause 9. The hall came apart. It was not applause. 900 species do not applaud. It was a sound asterisk, a vast composite noise of 90 kinds of astonishment, and it took Galactic's son 90 seconds to bring the funnel back to silence, and when she had, DHOSEM was still standing. The instrument is closed, said the presiding voice almost gently. Nothing can be withdrawn from a closed instrument. Legate, you told them so yourself. The machine does not run backward. No, DHOSEM agreed. It does not, so the Combine has done the other thing. He lifted a slate and his hand was quite steady. The Combine has drafted a severance under Article 18. Using, I am obliged to record, the filing conventions invented last month by the Terran Observer Mission, the RE2, and the Keeper, without which the Combine's clerks would have had no notion where to put it, and it severs Clause 9 from Instrument 12,417, and puts it separately, that it may be voted down. He turned then and looked up into the tiers, all 900 of them. The Combine does not need Bellwether's registry, he said. The Combine never needed it. It was tidy. That is the only reason it was ever there, and I have spent 38 days and a great deal of my life discovering what tidy costs. He paused. The Combine also withdraws the adjuration. The Combine finds that it does not wish to live in a house that can compel. The Combine finds, with some surprise, and I ask the record to note that a Caveth said this, that it would rather live in a house where a small member with a folding chair can stop the tide, because one day the small member may be us. He sat down. The roll, said Galactic's son, is called upon the severance of Clause 9. 11 minutes, 900 names. 899 voices said Assent, and the clause was severed, and it was put to the House alone, and it fell, the first measure in 4,000 years to be put, and rejected which meant that 4,000 years of the Great Concord had never once known what it felt like to say no to itself and survive. Humanity, said Galactic's son, in probation. The clause that occasioned the abeyance is not law. The House puts to you Instrument 12,417 in 13 clauses. Wren Adeyemi stood up for the 62nd time. Assent, she said. And the chain moved. 31,000 items, 4,000 years, 40,000 worlds, a grain convoy, a fishing fleet, a memorial to a dead arbiter, a footnote about tariffs and a correction to the footnote. All of it at once, in a great silent lurch that nobody in the hall could feel, and that every clerk in the great sorting halls felt like a physical blow, and the paper began at last to move. Wren sat down in her folding chair and put her hands flat on her knees, and discovered that she could not entirely see. The last thing she put before the House was 11 lines long. She had drafted it with Orun Teth and Ilvan of the Ritu over 4 nights, and she had wanted it to be longer, and the Keeper had told her dryly that the founders had needed only 11 pages, and that anything a young person could not say in 11 lines was probably not yet true. It created a procedure. It provided that a member declining assent should be heard within 3 days, in a chamber set aside for that purpose, before the House, that the hearing should be a hearing and not a negotiation, that the severance under Article 18 should have a standing form, and clerks trained in it, and a stamp, that no formula of consent should be recorded against a member that the member had not itself spoken, and that the adjuration on page 10 should be struck from the Charter entirely, so that the Great Concord should possess, in law and in fact, no power whatsoever to compel a member to say anything at all. And it provided one thing more, which was Ilvan's, and which he asked for with his small hands shaking, that any member held in wardship, or whose registry is held by a patron of record, may at any calling of the roll require that its own name be restored to it, and the House shall not refuse. It carried at the 65th roll, and it is called Article 0, because Uninterrupted insisted that it did not come after the charter but before it, that it had been sitting under the charter, unwritten, holding the whole thing up for 4,000 years. They built the chamber in the Old West Gallery. It is small and plain, and it has no funnel and no tiers, and the acoustics are terrible, and a delegate standing in it can be interrupted by anyone. This was deliberate. It is called the Chamber of Abeyance, and there is a door in it that leads directly onto the floor of the hall, and the door has a handle on both sides. The Ritu took back their name at the 71st roll. 19 peoples followed within the year. 2 of them chose to remain in wardship, having thought about it, having been asked, having said so out loud, and Wren, when the news came, sat down and put her head in her hands, and Kato Farron thought she was upset until he realized that she was not. "That's it," she said. "That's the whole thing. That's what it was for asterisk." She went home afterward. Not to Earth. Home to Bellwether, to the Hollow, to the 4th tier under a sky the color of dishwater, where 341,000 people mined tin and kept their own book with their own names in it. She was 23 by then. They offered her the Presidium and she declined it twice, and then a 3rd time in writing. And then Galactic Sun came all the way to Bellwether to ask her in person, and Wren made her a cup of tea and declined again. And the presiding voice of the Great Concord laughed for the first time in 2 years, and said that she should have known better than to ask a human that particular question. Ambassador Halima Nkemelu recovered most of her speech. She spent the rest of her life insisting, to anyone who would listen, that she had done nothing but read a clause and that the story belonged to a 3rd aide with a folding chair, and nobody believed her, and she found this deeply and permanently annoying. The chair itself is in the hall. It sits at the floor of the funnel on the white stone beside the black plinth. Aluminum and canvas, bought in a market on the 9th ring for 4 hours' wages. There is no plaque. Uninterrupted, who kept the Concord for another 11 years and then handed the whole of it, entire, to the next body in the chain, ruled that a plaque would be a monument, and that a monument is a way of putting a thing safely in the past. The chair is not in the past. It is set out empty, at every calling of the roll, 6 times a day, for as long as the Great Concord shall stand. And the reason it is there, the reason that 900 peoples at every roll look at an empty folding chair before they answer to their names, is that a very young woman once stood up in the most powerful room in the galaxy, holding a weight that would have broken most of them, and said the smallest word in any language, and did not flinch, and by refusing to give her consent, taught 4,000 years of civilization what their consent had been worth all along.